Who is up for two great UFO flicks? Filmmaker Darcy Weir with two new UFO UAP documentaries. The first, a scandal at the media empire Gaia, and the two on-air personalities at the center of it. Followed by another much-watched film as Darcy examines the Pascagoula, Mississippi case from 1973. Who's bringing the popcorn? Hey folks, I'm Matt Ford and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. There are a lot of UAP UFO documentary filmmakers out there, but we are really big fans of the work of our next guest, Darcy Weir, who will be joining us with his latest. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube, leave a comment, and let us know what you think about this episode. You can also find us on X at Good Trouble Show and everywhere else at The Good Trouble Show. You can also find us wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And if you would like to chip in to help keep the lights on here, we always appreciate that. You can become a Patreon member of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. Sign up to help us keep bringing you amazing shows like the one we have for you today. Now, our guest is an author. Our guest today is an author, investigative journalist, and documentary filmmaker who has produced 19 films and counting, covering topics from Bitcoin to UAP. He is making his third appearance on the Good Trouble Show to discuss his latest two projects. Please welcome Darcy Weir. Darcy, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. So welcome back to the show. This is your third appearance on the Good Trouble Show. So whenever we do come up with some kind of branded coffee cup, you'll be sure to receive it.
I can't wait. I've got one of these. I don't know if that's,
Oh yeah. Oh, there you go. I love that. So great to have you back. How have you been?
Good. Just been busy. I've been traveling a bit. I'm actually filming something right now, and got back from Los Angeles where the fires were happening about a week ago. It was pretty wild. Big wake-up call in terms of what's going on over there. Scary. Before that, I was in Nevada. I met up with George Knapp and interviewed him for an hour and a half, and just having a great time doing my little investigations and research into the phenomenon and telling stories.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, the fires, man. We were super lucky, but we had both cars packed. A mandatory evacuation zone was literally, probably about 100 yards away from our home. We were really lucky, and I know two friends of mine that literally lost everything.
Oh my God,
man, it is just tragic. So let's talk about something fun here, UAP. So now, as everyone knows, UAP whistleblower Jack Barber, he came forward last month on Ross Coulthart's excellent special on News Nation. And I'm curious, what was your reaction to Ross Coulthart's 1 hour special? How did you feel at that point about Jack Barber versus how did you feel about Jack Barber after the 1.5 hour episode came out?
Okay, so right off the top of my head, I'll say it seemed to be very synchronous with the type of work I'm researching right now, which is ESP, extrasensory perception, and the sort of non-human intelligence aspect of that history, going back to, the Stargate program, the DIA and CIA's research into remote viewing. I'm covering that, but then covering different aspects that haven't been discussed before. I had a chance to interview Russell Targ, who was, the godfather of that program. I spoke to Paul Smith, who worked on the DIA remote viewing program for many years, 10 years. I got to speak with Tracy Dolan, who's actually a remote viewer and a mystery school graduate, and many other people that are sort of linked to this phenomenon. Shout out to Chris Ramsey, who actually has done a really cool documentary on his YouTube channel, Area 52. He's a fellow Canadian. I think Jake Barber, he's legit. He is who he says he is. And they've been working on psionics, which is like a new word to the UFO community. But it's an older word in sort of a fictional landscape. I heard about psionics from like Marvel Comics back in the day. But when I heard it being used in terms of ESP, remote viewing, invoking sort of a consciousness, telepathic modality, that was new to me. So it's exciting. I think it's pretty interesting, and I want to see where things go with that. I think it was very timely in terms of his testimony and what I'm already working on.
Fantastic. Okay, so speaking of what you're working on and what you have been working on, you have 2 new series, a 4-part docuseries examining the 1973 Pascagoula UFO abduction case involving Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, and Maria Blair, which we'll get to later. We'll discuss that later in the show. And this one, Dark Alliance, the inside story of Cosmic Con. Let's watch.
Gaia and the cyberstalkers are the dark forces.
All right, so my clients are not the dark forces?
No.
But I would say to those of you that are supporting him and helping him to defend himself, what's he defending himself from? Who is the dark side? Because see, if you really look at it and dissect it, no one is suing Corey. He's the one suing everybody. Nobody's suing him. Who is the dark force? Who is the cabal?
Yeah, the cabal.
He said things like I couldn't believe, to be honest with you. He told me he was talking about 20 and back and bases on Mars and the moon and all this. Although none of that was in his book. I do believe that there was a information contamination.
I was contacted by Roger Ramsor, Roger Richards, who at the time was Corey Goode's business partner, manager, something to that effect. I believe he contacted me in about March 2017. I think if you look up sensational in the dictionary, you'll probably find David Wilcock's face in there. Because it is kind of like a cult tactics, cult-like behaviors that are going on around that group.
So I called Corey and I said, Corey, I'm calling on behalf of David. How much of a percentage is David going to get? Corey said to me, I'm not giving David a percentage.
Corey literally called himself the Enoch of our modern times, and David claims to have all these insiders, and they prop themselves up to be these larger-than-life personalities.
Hundreds of people have been on Gaia, having different TV shows and different personalities. Have any of them turned around and sued Gaia? Nobody but Corey Goode.
David is going to lead a conversation.
Raise our glasses to Bill William Hopkins.
Love you, Bill.
He told me, I forget the name of the company that created the Skynet in the Terminator films. He said he started Cyberdyne years before the Terminator film came out.
Let's go back to the beginning. I first met Corey and David. Well, let me back up a little bit from there.
Man, that is fantastic. Fantastic, just fantastic. I have to say, I watched it last night, the whole thing, both episodes. It's a 2-part documentary, and I was just completely riveted by the whole thing. So tell us about the story and what made you decide to cover it.
Well, you know, this is a UFO community story, and I had been tracking it for a long time. Like, the characters involved are Corey Goode, David Wilcock by majority. And, you know, I don't believe everything that's said in the UFO community. I don't trust everybody that's spoken and, you know, basically promoted themselves as being the one truth and the only truth. And that's kind of what these characters did. They propelled themselves to astronomical levels in terms of fame and fortune in the UFO community through an entertainment network called Gaia TV. And, you know, just based off of my research and all the public record information that we presented in that 2-part docuseries, I felt like it's kind of a karmatic right to some wrongs that were committed. And I hope to do more of that sort of stuff in the future. I like covering the crazy stories that come out of the UFO community. Some of them I believe, and you know, I represent that and stand behind that in some of my previous documentaries. In this series, I'm trying to say, you know, let's not get caught up in the BS, guys, and gals, because we're all just trying to get the best truth, right? We're all just trying to figure this mystery out. And the conviction behind making this documentary was getting to the bottom of the truth of what that was. And I feel like I did.
It's like I said, it was, you know, so I was aware of Gaia. You know, I'd heard of it. Now, understand, I haven't been in this UAP space for very long. This is, I think, like going on 3 years and 3 years now. So I was aware of Gaia, but I had no idea it was such a large media empire in this whole space. So I'm curious, does this still continue to affect them, the whole lawsuit and the fallout with these two main characters, if you want to call them characters?
Yeah, I think it's still an issue because, you know, they're producing these series, these documentaries and shows to entertain their base, which is about, you know, 600,000 strong, I believe, as of last year. And you know, that's not including YouTube and conferences and all the places that they, you know, get packed with their followers. They're being affected because there's still a pending case in April of this year between Corey Goode and Gaia TV upper brass. So like the vice president, the president, the owner, he essentially is suing them because he's saying all of that content that you produced at your network with my talent is actually my copyright and my trademark material. So you owe me. And I think if they would lose that case, they would owe him millions of dollars.
Oh, wow.
Because
okay.
It implies every time that the word SSP, which stands for Secret Space Program, or Blue Avians, which is a alien species that Corey Goode invented. Well, he kind of farmed it from previous people that had written about ideas of that in the UFO community before, and he propelled it to fame and, you know, popularity through Gaia TV. He's saying every time that those things are mentioned, or, you know, you sell this theory or this concept on your entertainment network without me, you owe me money.
Have you heard from Corey? Like, did he, after this thing came out, did him or his attorneys reach out or anything like that? Or has it been just kind of silent silence?
I have not heard directly from Corey. I've seen David Wilcock and Corey sort of echo that they know about certain things being out there in the media right now, and that they don't agree with it, and so on and so forth. But everything we've produced and put forward in this series is public record information. It's not defamation. It is just what happened. I'm also in Canada, which if they did want to retain legal counsel and have an international lawsuit, they could do that, but they need to do that within Canada. That's just how it works. It's not something that they did to all of their detractors in the past was what's called a SLAPP suit technique. You essentially use the legal system and commit terrorism or warfare against your opponents, people that you consider you don't like or you want to drag through hell. And the SLAPP suit technique ties them up in a lawsuit, which then they have to retain legal counsel. They have to submit documents. They have to go to court. And all that is time and money. And that can be very arduous. And, for example, Leon Isaac Kennedy, who I interviewed, the African-American actor that was tied up in this SLAPP suit fight with Corey, it cost him over $200,000 just to represent himself and, defend that he was not doing anything wrong by speaking out against Corey after this whole fiasco. And so that doesn't really work. That doesn't really work when you do.
Did the guy countersue him?
He did not. I did advise him around the time that this was happening that he should request some kind of settlement as a result of the case being dismissed. Sure. But I think he's just happy it's not happening anymore. And, there's other people that use these SLAPP suit techniques to shut down people and just terrorize them. And it's been happening in the community for a long time. I think David Wilcock is threatening an individual named Stephen Cambion right now with a SLAPP suit. He's threatening him because Cambion's been a very, outspoken critic of the truths that individual David has been promoting for the past 5 to 6 years. One of which is a hover car company called Stavati Aerospace, where he took millions and millions of dollars of investor money to build anti-gravitic space cars. And it turns out that none of that has actually happened. It was just collecting money for the sake of collecting money. And I will warn people in the UFO community on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, if you start to see people fundraising, collecting money for other whistleblowers or, some kind of, truther movement or something, that's a big red flag. That's just going to go into somebody's pockets.
What are Corey Goode and David Wilcock up to these days? So neither of them are obviously on Gaia any longer, correct?
Yes. So when they were finishing up at Gaia, they were requesting shares of the company because they did propel the company to astronomical, popularity at one point. And I think the lawsuit with Gaia and David Corey Goode is, mentioning some of that. I have read the papers. Since then the stock went from $20 something to $3 now. It's not like they're really going to recover anything like that. But Corey, he still promotes himself on his YouTube channel and says, I was in space and all that stuff. He says you perjure yourself when you say something like this. But there was a deposition that Leon Isaac Kennedy's legal team conducted, and that was provided to us for the documentary, in which he states, no, I never actually went to space. It was all like a, meditative process. I never physically went there. But in all of his testimony prior to that, which he sold his story on Gaia TV and in books and so on, so conferences, he said he physically went up there, and that it was all a physical process when they went 20 years into the future and then were age regressed back into a younger body. That was all a physical process. It wasn't some meditative thing. He says after on his social media and YouTube and such to his followers, who are very, let's say, gullible people, that he had to lie in the deposition in order to somehow comply with the legal proceedings. But no, you're supposed to only tell the truth in a deposition. So you've just perjured yourself.
Right.
David Wilcock has a huge following. It is mostly Christian. It's a sort of where they appealed to was a more New Age Christian population. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're saying that you're telling the truth and only the truth about secret space stuff and UFOs, but you're kind of muddying the water with the woo that's completely untrackable, untraceable in terms of fact and history, that's where it's, a problem.
Sure.
And David's mainly catering to that audience now, less about the UFO stuff. I think he's turned his back on that. He says that he's channeling Archangel Michael, that the angel is speaking to him. And he's saying, that there's, the end times, or like he said at one point in one of his previous streams that he deflected the bullet that was headed towards Trump's head.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, with the help of Archangel Michael.
Of course, yeah.
Astral projection or something.
Yeah. Archangel Michael is a big Trumper, by the way, in case you didn't know.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, apparently so, yeah.
Okay.
I'm making a joke.
So, yeah. Oh, okay, there you go.
I have no idea.
I don't follow enough about Archangel Michael, but I just know that
either.
It's, it appeals to a certain crowd, and I know that he is a key witness in the upcoming Gaia trial in April.
Wow. But maybe, I wonder if they're going to air those. We could do like a court TV thing.
Stream?
Yeah, like a live stream. And then obviously this story really well. We would have you on as like, I don't know if you remember.
Commentator?
Yeah. You could be like Doug Llewellyn from the People's Court. I don't know if you remember that from the 80s.
I love the song.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that would be great. So this whole like, all of this, like, to be honest, like smacks of kind of like cultism. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah. And I mean, look, in the UFO community, there is cultism. So, it's usually people that are going through some form of ontological shock.
Right.
They're completely blown away by the idea that all this information is repressed and secretive. And when you're going through that, you're looking for some kind of validation. You're looking for some kind of community to connect with. I went through it myself 20 years ago, pretty much. And I would say that point in time when somebody's most vulnerable is when they make decisions to follow people like this. And that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
It's not just, the Corey Goode and David Wilcock guys that you have to be careful about. There's all kinds of people in the UFO community right now that are, attracting certain information and certain following and weaponizing those people against their detractors. It's not going to be the only time we see this in history where people are creating sort of like armies, online armies to brigade and, attack their opponents on YouTube through comments or on Twitter through comments or on Facebook or Instagram. Like, this is age old because we are human. We are prone to doing things like this. And when you become part of these, groups, it gets kind of culty. But I think, I don't think I'm part of a cult. And I think I support the right people who are trying to push this subject forward logically, and, scientifically, and try to pull in the right key people within defense, intelligence, and academia to further validate that this is a real thing going on around our planet. I would never just follow somebody blindly. I'm always questioning, is somebody going to be portraying things properly?
Well, Darcy, this film was absolutely fantastic. I being somebody that's new to this whole topic, I thought it was riveting. I watched the whole thing, both episodes, front to back. And before we get into your next film, dealing with the Pascagoula abductions, where can folks at home find this film, Dark Alliance: The Inside Story of Cosmic Con?
Yeah, you can find this docuseries on Amazon Prime for free in the UK, Roku and Tubi TV for free in the United States, as well as Amazon Prime in the US, but it's just a small fee. So if they want to check it out there, if that's where they like to, capture their content.
Let's move on from talking about Gaia, cultish behavior, and Archangel Michael speaking through people and protecting President Donald Trump. Let's move on to a case of serious UAP history here. Let's dive into your second docuseries, a 4-part series, Pascagoula 73.
Normal fear is something that you expect here on this earth, but this was something that wasn't supposed to even exist.
Pascagoula 73 is the case we should be concentrating on. It's almost perfect. 2 witnesses, interviews at the sheriff, interviews at the Air Force base.
But it appeared to me that it was about 30 or 40 foot long and maybe 8 or 10 foot high.
Lots of other sightings, things seen in the river, other witnesses who were on the opposite side of the river that night.
I even asked that to him before he died. I said, do you remember me saying there's somebody out there I can see him? And he said, yes, I do. And he said, I lied about that. I did see what they said, what you see, but I didn't want people to think I was crazy.
And on we go. It even made its way into popular culture. Even Walter Cronkite covered the story.
For weeks now, there have been reports of UFO sightings in many parts of the country, but especially the Gulf Coast.
One newspaper put a sketch of a supposed extraterrestrial visitor on the front page.
His abduction and other people as well, coming forward saying, I saw this, that, and the other.
I don't know what it was. I know it wasn't a plane or a helicopter.
So I opened the door after a few seconds to step out to see if I could really tell what it was, and just took off.
And the case just took off from there.
Calvin Parker, I was questioning him, and at one time he wanted to climb the wall. That's how nervous and how shook up he was. And then the examiner, he began to wonder himself. So he ran the 3rd test, and he believed just what Mr. Hickson had told him.
So you would believe them then? Oh yes, there's no doubt whatsoever that they were telling the truth.
The sheriff who was involved, Sheriff Fred Diamond, 2 nights later had his own UFO sighting.
These things weren't beings, they were robots.
Yeah.
But I believe the beings that has contacted me since then was the beings that were controlling these robots.
If his fantasies are fact, it is the greatest threat to the well-being of the people of this nation.
I think drink. That's just what I think about her.
Wow, I have to say that trailer really gave me the chills. And, interestingly enough, I remember becoming fascinated by this topic when I was around 9 years old. The first book that I came across in my elementary school library, surprisingly, was this book about the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. So as soon as I read that, it's like, I want to read more about this topic. And I think this was like the second case that I read about. So walk us through the Pascagoula case.
Yeah, so Barney and Betty Hill you brought up, that was 1969. And 4 years later, in 1973, on the night of October 11th, Calvin Parker, a 19-year-old man, and Charlie Hickson, a 42-year-old, were fishing on this river, the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. This is where they saw a light, and eventually that came upon them, and they saw three beings hovering out of the craft. Soon after, they were taken on board and they were abducted. This is part of the abduction phenomenon that John Blitch, one of your recent guests, has mentioned. And, even in Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, he discusses that the abduction phenomenon is real. I think this case stands out because I actually got to work with a fellow UFO researcher based out of the UK, believe it or not, Philip Mantle. I flew over to the UK and, interviewed him at length on this case, and he provided me all the documents, the reports, the evidence that something happened that night, before that night, and after that night in the Mississippi area. It seems that there was a UFO flap that was going on, and that was when this abduction occurred. So pretty interesting case, and the way we broke it down, it's a 4-part docuseries, each about an hour long, each episode. The first episode is the story of Charlie Hickson. The second is Calvin Parker's. The third is Maria and Jerry Blair. There's some recent people that came forward. And the fourth is really a biography sort of episode, and how Philip Mantle became a UFO researcher as a young lad. He eventually got into the abduction phenomenon, met abductees over in the UK and abroad in Europe, and then how he eventually got tangled up in this story, met Calvin Parker, and wrote the books, and really did a deep dive on this case.
Now, the Pascagoula 1973 case is considered one of the most important in the study of this phenomena. What about that case makes it so important, in your opinion?
What makes it important is that there was just so many witnesses, and there was so much reporting around it. So something really did happen. For example, there's at least a dozen people that came forward and gave their testimony of seeing a UFO that night or other nights before and after in that area. Police officers, there's the Air Force got involved. J. Allen Hynek, who worked as the lead scientific investigator for Project Blue Book, he got involved, and he authenticated that something really did happen to these men. With another scientist of the time, James Harder, that was taking this stuff very seriously, both university professors. You have, the Navy got involved. You have basically witnesses that didn't want to come forward at first, but eventually were tracked down because Philip was such a, dog on a scent. He knew of these people and chased them down abroad and got their testimony and such.
How has modern ufology, I can always screw that up whenever I try to say it. How has modern ufology changed the perception of this case? Has it changed since compared to when it was really being investigated in the 70s?
I think it has been affected slightly. I think the men's testimony did change a little bit over time. One of the things that you hear about quite often in ufology is that contactees, abductees, experiencers, they get telepathic messages every now and then that, we got to protect our planet, we got to protect each other. There's possibly this doom on the horizon. And that wasn't a message that initially came out from the very get-go with Charlie Hickson, but he eventually was telling that story that he was getting these messages from the beings that originally orchestrated this abduction. Calvin Parker, he was pretty much out of the limelight. He wanted nothing to do with presenting on this initially, and he warmed up to it over time and eventually had these hypnotic regressions. Hypnosis is a tool that's often spoken about being used on abductees. And I think in modern ufology, hypnosis gets attacked as an improper tool to bring about memories that really happened. There's a scientist that wrote a book saying that these people might be suffering from false memory syndrome, that they're just not really remembering what happened. And I think what's put pretty plainly and eloquently by Jennifer Stein, who's a director of MUFON out of Sedona, Arizona, she says that hypnosis is really a tool that's used to calm people down. You're trying to peel back these layers of stress and tension and allow somebody to get into a mode or get into a state where they're relaxed enough to talk about something that's traumatic. That's all really hypnosis should be used for. And I'm not a fan of it being used for, some kind of programming or whatever, but there is evidence of that through the CIA in the past. But for these people that are trying to discuss something that happened to them that's super, super traumatic, frightening.
Sure.
You would say that the tool is just to get them relaxed enough to recall things. And you really see the difference actually between the Calvin Parker hypnosis session and the Maria Blair hypnosis session. So Calvin is just talking about his abduction very frankly. He's relaxed, and it's because he's gone over it so many times. He's been hypnotized to recall everything so detailed that it's just like breathing to him now, right? I'm sure the very first time that somebody got him to talk about it when he was around the age of 19, he was extremely frightened. And there's evidence that he was in and out of psychiatric hospitals. He was quitting all of his jobs that the press found him at during these days, the early days. But Maria Blair, she's never really been hypnotized. And when we showed that hypnosis session, she was very frightened. She was extremely scared recalling that because she hasn't gotten as relaxed, or she hasn't been through this reliving of the experience many times.
Now, one part that really resonated with me in this film was the involvement of debunker Philip Klass. Do you see similarities between Klass's tactics attacking this case and those of today's debunker McWest, who's really kind of Philip Klass 2.0 in my opinion?
Yeah, I think something that's really important to look at if you are observing debunkers' tactics, it's quite often don't attack the information, attack the person. You know, it's better to attack the credibility of a person or their ability to actually discern information than the actual information itself. I mean, you can call things birds and balloons so many times, but you know, if a credible observer or a radar or FLIR system is able to pick those up as they are, as balloons or birds, then that whole argument falls apart on itself. And really what you're doing is you're attacking the person. And Philip J. Klass was very good at that. He would try to find out all of the dirt on people before he would have a debate with them on TV or radio.
Wow.
Yeah, he would invest great time and sometimes resources, money, to understand the person, their background, and therefore when he's actually confronting them, he could bring up something about their past. You know, maybe they had a run-in with the law, or maybe they had financial situations that required them to somehow come up with money, and this was a way of doing it by grifting and you know, all that stuff Philip Klass tried to do to Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson, and it didn't work. He couldn't really find anything on them. There was nothing that was substantial about their past that would show that they were criminals. And you know, I was interviewed on a like more pop culture show recently, and they were asking me that side of these men. They were basically trying to debunk them in this interview I had with them. They were like, "Oh, are they criminals? Did they have a criminal past? You know, were they financially having issues? Yada yada." Like both of them. You know, Calvin lost his job the same week that he got it.
Wow.
So it wasn't great for him. But he would go on to work in oil and gas industry around the Gulf area, and he had no problem making money. And that's why he never wanted to create fame or money through this story. Charlie Hickson, he kept that job at that shipyard for some time after the incident. And, you know, he was just fascinated by what happened to him and spoke at conferences and on TV or radio whenever he was asked, because he wanted to speak to what happened. He wasn't like being paid for it.
What psychological and medical disorders were reported by both Charlie and Calvin? There were quite a few, right?
Yeah, so there was a debunker that picked this up later on. He gave them two separate diagnoses, which, you know, is pretty hard to factor in or explain. But I mean, it's just a way of attacking the person's credibility, right? It's not attacking the information. And that's the problem. Like, that's where debunkers get their fuel. They really try to go after who is this person instead of what is the event, what is the credibility about the information they're presenting.
Yeah, and I'm curious, was Philip J. Klass, did people think that he was employed by the CIA or anything like that? Like, what are the sort of theories? I know very little about him, but it sure seems like for somebody that doesn't believe in this topic back then, he sure spent a lot of time and effort, much like someone we know today, on really just kind of going after these folks.
Mm-hmm. So two researchers, Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Marden, they did a really good sort of historical research on Philip J. Klass. They wrote this book. I can't remember what it's called. But I made a documentary with Stanton Friedman called Being Taken, where I interviewed like Travis Walton and Kathleen and him. And we talked about the Betty and Barney Hill case and such. And when they were telling me about the research they did on Philip J. Klass, they found two things that he had done in the past. So he had been employed through the Air Force by the CIA. He was like, they recovered checks in which he was paid. So they had they actually had a paper record of his funding from these two different agencies to go out on their behalf and debunk cases in the public media. So they recovered that sort of information. They also recovered, one of Travis Walton's best friends, who was also part of this crew that were felling trees and outside of Snowflake, Arizona. The night that they saw that, they saw this object, all these men, and then they disappeared after they saw Travis get struck by this light. They thought he was dead. And, the rest is history. But after the fact, one of those men came forward, and in Jennifer Stein's documentary, which is called Travis, she found out that Philip Klass tried to bribe one of these guys with $10,000 to say that it was all not true.
Wow.
To say that, they made it all up, or some kind of excuse for what they saw that night that was not truly a UFO phenomenon. And he rejected that, but this was back in the 70s. So imagine...
It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money that this guy could have taken and just bailed on his friend and said, no, this is all untrue. We made it up. So that's the type of things that these guys do. You can't really do that with a Tic Tac video or Go Fast. You have to use the scientific, mainstream scientific community to do that. And I think they're doing that right now with Joshua Semeter and Sean Kirkpatrick by debunking all the UAP videos in the new Nova special that they put out.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know much about Joshua Semeter or whatever the hell his name is, but we know that Sean Kirkpatrick. Don't even get me started. But one thing that I thought, somebody that was a skeptic apparently before all of this was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and I understand that this case was a watershed moment for him. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so he was the scientist that was traveling to Michigan to say that a whole community of farmers and locals that saw a craft for days and nights and apparently even touched down was just swamp gas reflecting in the moonlight. So that's a pretty famous quote, and it's reverberated throughout the decades to show how lazy or preposterous some debunking could be of the UFO phenomenon. But he took the case very seriously, or he took cases very seriously that were part of the Blue Book era. And after that was retired, he started up QFOS, Center for UFO Studies.
Okay.
And he continued to speak to experiencers and to compile evidence of other UFO cases post Project Blue Book. And one of these incredible cases that he covered 4 years later was Pascagoula. And he even states when he spoke about their case publicly that there were many other people that he had interviewed in the past that had had these abduction-like experiences.
How have modern day abduction cases compared to the 1973 Pascagoula case, would you say?
Well, there have been many people that have said they've been abducted since then. And in fact, famous Apollo 14 astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, he came back from space, and he was very, curious about the UFO subject. Many people know that he was involved with the Wilson memo, the Wilson Davis documents and such. But something he did was he started up the Edgar Mitchell Research Foundation. Mm-hmm. And in 2022, they published a paper, which you can find in the same archive that the, recent, ultra terrestrial and, it's the same archive. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the Free Study, FREE Foundation.
Is this the one at like University of Houston, I think, or is that something else?
Something else. I'd have to look it up, but I'm going to talk about the study that Edgar Mitchell's foundation published. It's called FREE, Foundation for Research of Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Claims. And so in this study, they cover over 3,000 people that have discussed experiencing abduction, contact, near-death experiences. So it's quite a wide gamut. And if you think about it, in that database, that pretty large study, there are people that have been reporting this, in the past 2 decades, all the way back to, post-Roswell. So the common attributes from an abduction are this. People remember seeing an object or some kind of anomaly in their reality. Things got really quiet, or they saw a light in the sky at night, or they saw a UFO during the day, that type of thing. Then they have kind of missing time. They don't quite remember what happened between then and maybe being on a craft or being out of their home. And sometimes that's just because they remember being back home or in their car or in a field hours later. And they can't account for how they got there. And, that is something that's commonly reported with abductions.
Right. Now, that's right. Please go ahead.
These men did not have missing time.
Okay, they did not.
No.
Okay. Now, tell us about this rock that Charlie, did he receive it or he was told where to find it? What was the deal with the rock?
Yeah, so he said he was getting like telepathic messages to go to certain places, and he found this rock by a riverbank. And, this is something that I'm not 100% sure is real. I don't know if it was his way of continuing to tell a story to the UFO community. And that seems to happen sometimes in the overall phenomenon. Sometimes something real happens, and once people get attention and people coming to them for more, they want to provide more. So they start telling other stories. His whole story behind that was that the rock was given to him, and it would warm up every time they wanted to communicate with him.
I definitely don't have a pet rock like that, but you know what? Nothing would surprise me. I hear this crazy stuff, or what to me seems crazy, and then find out that it actually did happen. So nothing would surprise me. Now, you mentioned Dr. John Blitz earlier. So Dr. John Blitz, he was on our show, former Green Beret. He appeared on our show to discuss whistleblower Jack Barber. Now, one of his statements was that the U.S. government was aware of this entire abduction phenomenon, and that is the reason, or the really key reason why this has been covered up. What did Charlie say about that in relation to like what the government knew with this Pascagoula case and his or their abduction?
Yeah, so I think Charlie and Calvin were convinced that the government knew about this based on their interaction with like the Air Force of the time and other government people that came across intelligence community people that came across them throughout the decades. They thought that essentially maybe the reason that disclosure never really was going to happen to the fullest extent is because the government would have to admit that they knew about this and that they had not warned the public en masse for fear of, basically being under attack by the public that they weren't informing on this issue.
Sure. Yeah. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I always kind of thought more the nuclear connection, things like that were the main reason. But if indeed these abductions are happening, then and the government knows about it, then I wouldn't blame them for covering it up. Not that I'm condoning it. I think that the truth has got to come out. But at least I can sort of empathize with where they were perhaps coming from. Now, why has, and this is something I've always wondered, why has the abduction phenomenon been maligned in the past by UFO researchers? And do you think that is changing today?
What do you mean by maligned?
Well, in other words, you have the folks that feel that seem to want to just focus on the nuts and bolts stuff, but they don't want to talk about abductions. That is a bridge too far. Do you think that dynamic is changing? And because obviously these things are flying around, which would lead one to question, okay, well, what is flying these things around? What is inside of these craft? Do you think that the hesitancy of people or UFO researchers or whatnot not wanting to address what is flying them, and then really moreover the abduction part of it, do you think that is changing at all? That this sort of let's not talk about that part kind of mentality?
Well, I think it is changing quite a bit because Whitley Strieber is one of the most famous abductees, right? Talked about the Greys and his interactions in that book Communion. And Jacques Vallée is, very open about that. He's been discussing this stuff recently. I think that there's kind of a fractured expectation within the UFO community of what is interacting with us. So if you go to the David Wilcock and Corey Goode side, there's what's considered to be a galactic federation. So this panel of altruistic alien beings that are on our side, and they want to help us ascend and all this stuff, which I don't really buy because it comes from popular science fiction stories. It's straight up in Star Trek and many other science fiction stories back in the day. But then, on top of that, we don't even work well with each other as human beings. Why would we work well with extraterrestrials and multiple extraterrestrial races at that? If you go in the sort of same direction of the Galactic Federation theory people, you get people like Stephen Greer. And Stephen Greer will say that all abductions are actually conducted by the military. He calls them MILABs, military abductions. And that is, the sort of, it's this PSYOP, and it's all to try and create negativity around the UFOs because the aliens that are actually out there are our buddies. They're here to save us. They're here to make us ascend, and you can be just like me and we can ascend together and, hold hands in the sky with these alien beings. Which again, it's what the heck? Where's the evidence behind any of these claims, right? So that's where, you get a lot, and he's a major thought leader in the community. There's people that think he's like a messiah, right? in terms of delivering the truth and only the truth that's represented in ufology, the study of UFOs and possible occupants on those crafts. But then, the nuts and bolts crowd, they get paranoid that, if we talk about who's piloting these craft, which are possibly aliens, non-human intelligence, well, then you're also going into a fantasy land that's, not trackable with actual documentation, well-vetted pictures, and well-proven videos of non-human intelligence. That is the greatest secret, right? That is the one thing that if the intelligence community and the defense community has been keeping the lid on this subject for decades now, if something actually came off of the Roswell, New Mexico crash of 1947, that was a cadaver or a live being that was non-human, well, that's going to be the major thing you're not going to allow to the public. And we haven't really, had that evidence out there in a really well represented way that we can say, aha, that's finally true, that there are non-human intelligences that are piloting these craft that we can put our finger on, right? So that's where it's hard, right? The abduction thing is one step too far because it mixes the objects, the testimony of people meeting these beings that are non-human, and then, unpacking what does the government really know about that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And there are not a lot of resources for abductees to find help. Are you aware of any that you would recommend?
Yeah, I know Diane Hennessy is doing some great work with experiencers and abductees. There's, the Edgar Mitchell's Institute also deals with experiencers. I know Leslie Keene is somebody that has been helping experiencers connect and, whether they need psychological help or need somebody to talk to about their experience and unpack it. I think those are three places you can go to right now.
Awesome. Yeah, I certainly hope people will reach out to those resources if they feel that they need them. Pascagoula 73, where can folks find this fantastic docuseries?
That's on Amazon. It's on, I think it's already coming to Roku and eventually to YouTube movies. So yeah.
Fantastic. And again, I cannot recommend these enough. I've watched them. Really, really great work. Your production value is just off the charts, and the storytelling, it's just really, really great. Can't recommend it enough. So thanks for joining us, Darcy Weir. We look forward to having you back on the show to talk about your next film. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Matt. I appreciate you spending the time to chat with me about this new work.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Darcy Weir, ladies and gentlemen. I had an absolute blast chatting with Darcy. If you enjoyed the interview, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. It really, really helps us out. And don't miss out. Click here for another awesome chat on The Good Trouble Show.